Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 creatures which you need for the island, so let's get into it. In at number 10 is the Daedon, and there is no doubt that this is one of the most useful creatures on the island, namely for its bossing abilities. Obviously this isn't going to be the creature which is going to defeat any kind of boss. It does not have the melee damage to do that, but if you level up this thing's food stat like absolute crazy, and then you can use this thing to heal up your dinosaurs in the boss fight, which is a very useful thing, and especially because there's no things like stars on the island. Yes, you can transfer, but all the creatures on this list do natively spawn on the island, so don't expect any others. The Daedon is pretty much your only option out there, and its ability is just so good and it is so easy to use. The only real downside being the amount of meat it consumes, and you're going to need to really pump that hunger, but it actually isn't too bad and it is definitely worth it. In at number 9 is the Basilo, and this creature is pretty much your best bet for doing any kind of cave runs which you'll find out there. Obviously underwater ones, this thing is not a land creature, and I think there are 2 underwater caves on the island, one of the artifacts being used for the Megapithecus and one of them being used for the dragon. I'm pretty sure there's only 2, yeah, there's only 2 underwater caves, and the Basilosaurus is going to be extremely useful in all of those cases. It has the damage to deal some of a fight. Yes, it isn't going to stack up to the Mosasaur, but the fact that this thing is immune to electric eels and jellyfish and all those things makes this one of the most safe creatures to take into the ocean, as most of the threats are now just not even able to do their main abilities. The only thing you really have to take into mind is the fact that they have a depth limit, but as a nice little bonus, these things will also passively make oil. Next up, we have the Uteranus, and again, compared to the Daedon, the story is very similar. This is a great boss creature, which I think is highly essential for the island, and it is useful on all 3 of those boss fights, and it definitely is one which you'll want to use at some point 100%, as obviously this isn't going to deal the damage in the boss fight, although you could use uses for that. That's not really their use case, and they're not going to heal up the creatures because that's the Daedon's job. This thing will buff up all of those creatures with its all famous Courage Roar, and courageous you can also be if you drop a quick sub on the channel. It is always greatly appreciated. But it also does have the Fear Roar as well, which isn't particularly useful for bosses due to the size limit on the Fear Roar, but if someone's trying to raid your base in PvP on a Pteranodon, then you can use the Fear Roar if you have a Uteranus on you, and they will have no chance in raiding you or scouting your base out whatsoever. Good PvP tip if you didn't know that already. In at number 7 is the Aloe, and this creature is a really great entry level carnivore on the island, and you may get somewhat angry with what I've put in the number 2 spot. If you know me already, you'll know what's in that spot, and you might want to put the Aloe in the number 2 spot, and the creature which is in number 2 in this spot, and that is totally fine. You can form your own opinions on these dinosaurs. This is just my take, as albeit the Aloe is an amazing creature, inflicting a great amount of bleed damage and having a very useful pack buff, it just isn't my go-to carnivore of choice, as it is a little bit too out of reach in terms of the level in some ways of when it is unlocked, as it is a much harder tame than the other one that is on this list, obviously. And also, I kind of don't like the size as much. I prefer those smaller carnivores. I just feel like I have a little bit more protection, and albeit the Aloe is much more powerful than the creature which shall not be named, which is obviously in the number 2 spot, the Aloe is just, I don't know, it's just not as appealing to me in a lot of ways. But I will definitely say that it is a truly amazing creature, which if you get the chance to on the island, which everyone realistically should, and especially on ASA, as they are so easy to tame with the new baby dino mechanic, you really can't miss out on taming a pack of Aloes. Remember, pack size is always 3, so if your pack aren't working, if you only have 2 aloes, get a third one and that pack buff will appear. Next up on the list we have the Rex, and this is pretty much your go-to boss creature which you can use on the island. Although in the honourable mention section of this video there are a couple of other creatures which are great boss creatures but which sadly didn't make it on my top 10, but they may have made it on yours. Either way, back to talking about the Rex, you can kind of tell why this is such a great boss creature. It is a big hunking carnivore with great big teeth and a lot of power, and compared to a lot of other carnivores, I feel like I'm saying a lot, just did say it twice in a sentence there, but either way, compared to other carnivores, this thing's health is actually way higher than loads of the other options, making it the ideal boss creature for you to go with, as it is just such a balanced creature. While yes, it isn't the carnivore which deals the most amount of damage on the island, which is still allowed into bosses. The Giga I'm not counting here, as the Giga is sort of in a different league as a carnivore, but in terms of things like the Spino, yes, it will deal more damage, but its health is a lot lower, so the Rex is usually the go-to, and the Rex is significantly easier to tame, and its saddle also doesn't require silica pulse to craft, which can be a very big annoyance. Although at that stage of the game it isn't too much of a hindrance, it still can be a bit of one. In at number 5 is the Thyla, and there is a lot to say about the Thyla, and this creature is just so good at so many things, and it is actually one of the most versatile art creatures in my opinion. I've just done a top 10 on that recently, so if you go look on the channel you can see that top 10 if you're keen on it. And also in terms of the Thyla's abilities, obviously apart from it just being versatile, this thing is a really great climber of all things. You saw it climb redwood trees there, but it can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface. Although meshing and meshes is a big glitch on ASA at the moment, so you can get yourself into some pretty sticky situations with terrain, and even fall through the terrain if you know that's your thing. But you know, ASA is still an early access game. They could have definitely worked on it a lot more though. But in terms of its other abilities as well, it isn't just a really great travel mount. Although it is a great use for it, it is also a really great carnivore, sadly not being allowed into boss fights. But I guess we have the Deinonychus on Valguero if you want a boss creature with kind of similar abilities to this, as that creature can also climb, but it is allowed into bosses, and in my opinion it is better than the Thyla, but that doesn't spawn on the island, so therefore it does not qualify for this list. But the main reason for its great attack is obviously that bleed ability which it has. Barely any other carnivores have this, which kind of doesn't make sense considering what they're doing, and they're literally ripping right into a creature. You'd expect bleed damage to occur, but most carnivores don't even use that ability, and the fact that this has it is a huge bonus. Next up we have the Theri, and would it really be a list without the Theri here? This creature is just so useful for so many things, it had to be put on this list. The Freddy Krueger of Ark, with its saddle and locked at level 69.
Nice.
This thing really does pack a punch in all of its abilities, namely its fiber gathering, which barely any creatures can stack up to, although the Moss Chops is a great shout in the early game. Sadly it isn't on the list or in the honourable mentions, but you know, I guess it got a little mention here with the Theri. But also the Theri is great at gathering berries as well, and so with wood and thatch too. And it is a pretty good meat gatherer as well, as this thing really does pack a punch in terms of damage. And it is the go-to creature for doing the dragon boss fight, as that boss is very unfair to all kinds of carnivores, and it is really nice to have this creature as a backup. Although the only real downside is sweet vegetable cake is the only way that you can really heal these things up in a quick manner. But if you have a Daedon with you, that really shouldn't be too much of an issue. In at number 3 we have the Baryonyx. And would it really be a top 10 the island creatures list without this thing appearing at some point? This is by far the best caving creature on the island, and there is no competition at all. No creature can stack up to this thing in all of its abilities. It is just so good at caving. It has to be put on this list for all of its greatness in every aspect of caving. It's the right size and it deals a heavy amount of damage with a reasonable health stat, great stamina and great weight to go with it too. There is nothing which could really be improved about with this creature. Maybe apart from it not eating normal meat instead of fish meat, and the fact that it spawns in the swamp isn't great. But I'm happy to take those as some side effects for a creature which is just this good. It is almost too good to be true. And it also does have a right click attack in the water which can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. And it is a very viable solution if you don't have a Basilosaurus for the underwater caves on the island. And this is the creature which I said when I was talking about the aloe. You may be a little bit upset at this being in the number 2 spot, but I absolutely adore the Carno in so many ways. It has to be put on the number 2 slot for me. The also amount of nostalgia I get from this creature is insane, and it has the bleed ability too, and although it doesn't have the pack buff, it is a much more manageable size, and also it is a very nice carnivore to control as well. Albeit the aloe has a nice turning circle and all of that, but the Carno really just feels much nicer to control, and in my opinion it is just a better designed creature. And also with its comedically small arms, you have something to laugh about with this thing too, and it just has so much character around it. And again, its saddle level being in the 40s or 50s, I can't remember. It's one of those. It's very achievable for any Ark player really, if you just put a little bit of effort into the game. It is a really great carnivore in the early stages, of obviously mid stages as well. And you don't even need the saddle to fully utilize this creature. You can just have it following you around on adventures until you get that saddle, and you could be leveling up along the way to get it ready for when you first ride it. A very good strategy actually, considering that trank arrows unlocked at level 21, and from there it is really easy to make a basic wooden trap and just trank this thing out. You really cannot go wrong with the Carno. But before we get into number 1, I have a few quick honourable mentions. And finally, in at number 1, we have the RG. And really, what did you expect? This thing is an absolute beast of a creature which really does deserve to be respected. And it is a go-to on all maps except Arboration and Gen 1, as obviously flyers aren't allowed on those maps. But on all other maps, you need an RG really. These creatures are just that useful. They are the pinnacle of metal resource gathering, and when paired with something like an Anki or a Dodic, which I'm kind of going to tie into the number 1 spots here, as they really work well together as creatures, you have yourself pretty much the best harvesting creature combination which you could possibly have. The RG has weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, obsidian, and much more, and paired with something like the Anki, which can gather insane amounts of metal, it really is set up for success. And the RG deals a reasonable amount of damage as well, has a great weight stat and a great stamina stat, which is actually why the stamina didn't even make the top 10 list, as usually I'll just go straight to the RG, and albeit the Pteranodon is a good tame which is great for beginners and very beginner friendly, I always just go straight for the RG and don't even bother with the Pteranodon. And on top of that as well, its saddle acts as a portable smithy, which is a nice thing if one of your metal weapons breaks out on your travels, or your flak armor in cave runs, and also it has a nice little neat regen buff if you eat a dead corpse. This creature is amazing. The top 10 at best Ark travel mounts. In at number 10, I've decided to put the Rock Drake, as I find this is actually quite an effective creature for travel if you utilize it on the right maps. Yes, it doesn't fit into every situation where you may want this thing. But to be honest, if you get one and you use it for travel, especially on Aberration, it's like your only choice really on that map without any kind of transfers of things like Bloodstalkers and Maywings and all of that. It is really going to do a lot of good service on that map, and it really does do you some good service on some other maps as well, like Gen 1 2 if you want to bring it over, and especially maps with a lot of things just like big objects everywhere for this creature to hold on to, because it's not particularly great with loads of flat terrain. I wouldn't bring it on the island of course, but still you can get quite a lot of leeway out of this creature even in some flatter environments. I'm using it in one here and I still did get across this place pretty quickly while also recording the B-roll, so it went pretty smoothly in my opinion, and it is definitely a very nice, fast, reasonably great travel mount. There's also got a load of great attacking abilities as well, which just help it along the way. Next up on the list, I've decided to put the Pteranodon, as I really do like this as a general flyer. I think it has a lot going for it, especially considering the level that you actually unlock this thing. It's sort of insane what you can get out of this creature. It's a little bit absurd, to be honest, the level on which this creature is actually unlocked, as you would expect it to be unlocked way later into everything. But honestly, for level 38 saddle, this is one of the best flyers, or just travel mounts in general, that you can get, and I think nothing really else can compete with it, unless you're obviously on Gen 1 and Aberration, where you simply can't use Pteranodons. But you know, we're going to exclude those for the time being, as the majority of maps do allow flyers, and for all of those, which is obviously most of them, you're going to have a very good time with this mount. They're quick and easy to tame. You can simply do it with a bowler. You'll have no issues whatsoever. At least I haven't. The only real difficulty is getting that saddle, as you know, that chitin and keratin can be a little bit of a nuisance to get sometimes. But apart from that, it's totally fine. Continuing on the list, I've decided to put the Crystal Wyvern, as I find this is an effective mount just generally for all of that flying. Yes, you can use normal wyverns as well, but I just prefer the Crystal Wyvern. It's not necessarily that they're better in terms of a travel perspective, but I do vastly prefer the taming of these creatures. It's much easier. You only need to be level 60, which can be simply done with a note run, and then you knock out one of these things to get some primal crystal, and then passive tame one. My favourite is the Blood Crystal Wyvern. Comment down what your favourite is, as I definitely like to know, because you know, we all have a favourite wyvern, I think, at the end of the day, unless you've never used them before, especially in the Crystal Wyverns, I find, because their abilities are just so cool. The Ember Crystal Wyvern is one which is quite highly rated too. It has the same speed, mobility and rubbish turning circle as a normal wyvern, but they are really effective travel mounts, being like some of the fastest flyers in the game. I'm not including gliding abilities into that factor, just straight flying. The wyverns are some of the fastest out there, so they really do deserve this spot in my opinion, as I feel like, you know, they can be used quite effectively for a lot of travel scenarios. Coming up in the number 7 spot is the Snow Owl. This is the first glider, quote unquote, apart from the Rock Drake that we've had on the list. And this is one where I find it is a really effective traveller. It is a basic knockout tame, and you'll have no issues with that whatsoever. You simply need to head over to the Snow Biome on Extinction, and I think they spawn on Fjorda as well. So if you don't have Extinction, hop over to there, and I think you'll find them on that map. They obviously have that sort of dive bomb ability like the Griffin. The Griffin isn't on this list, but I'll give it a brief honourable mention. You could slot it in the same spot as the Snow Owl. They are quite similar when it comes to travelling abilities. It's just the Snow Owl is my preferred creature. I find them a little bit easier to tame, and I like some of their other abilities along with it. But obviously they're very quick flyers because of that dive bomb ability. Also feel it's a little bit more fluid than the one that the Griffin's got. That's probably merely a placebo, but we'll go with it. They also do have a kind of heat-seeking UV ability sort of thing, where you can go around and scout out all kinds of just organisms that give off heat. That can be used in whatever scenario you may need to apply it to. It sort of acts as night vision as well in some cases. Then obviously they can heal up creatures. You just need to level up their stamina more if you want to heal those creatures up for longer. If you're wondering why you can't heal creatures up for longer, it's because you need more stamina. So get that stamina cranking, then you can heal some creatures for serious lengths of time and really get them healed up. It's great if you're just taming something and then its health is really low, like you've been training it for ages. You can simply heal it with one of these things and it's back up to scratch. The Daedon can't do that because it can only heal up your own creatures. And obviously snow owl pellets are going to be extremely useful if you're feeling scratches. You can get some insane loot. Next up, I've decided to put the Astradelphus, as I find this is a really effective speed mount. If you want to get somewhere really quickly, the Astradelphus or the Triple Ignatus, I'm kind of going to tag team them together because they are quite similar as creatures. Then you're going to want one of these two. The Astradelphus is just my favourite though, so that's why I'm putting it here instead. They can dash across the map with insane speed, and that isn't even accounting for obviously any speed leveling that you may do, because you can't on these things like you can't on all flyers unless you enable it, but you can get some insane speed on these things totally like on official settings, and that is absurd. The only reason why you go for a Tropio, in my opinion, over the Astradelphus is the taming method is slightly less expensive. The maps that it spawns on tend to be better, and obviously the saddles are not at a way lower level. But apart from that, the Astradelphus really does take the crown, in my opinion, for just being such a great travel mount. It can travel with such great speed and agility. It really is an effective mount for all of that. It's just like a dog fighter, but in Ark, essentially. In at number 5, I've got to put the Rhinognatha. This is obviously a very recent addition to Ark, but it really has influenced a lot of great travelling, at least from me, and especially considering you can pick up things like Diplos and Rexes and Parasauritheriums. It's absurd what this creature can really do. It's sort of insane, really. It's like, honestly, mind-boggling from a person like me who's been playing Ark for absolutely ages. It's crazy how the game really progresses. I'm definitely here for it, even though I wasn't really when this creature first came out. It's obviously quite a rare one. You find it on the island in the Lost Islands. It's very accessible to all you players out there because obviously it spawns on just the main map of the game. And sadly, it's the swamp biome, makes the swamp biome even more dangerous. But when it comes to speed and agility, the Rhinognatha really just does have it. It can go with so much give. It's insane, really. You can fly for tremendous distances without really using up any stamina, and their weight is great. You can carry a lot with you, and you can travel with great speed too, which is something which sort of matters at the end of the day. So let's just continue on the list, shall we? Next up, I'm putting the Desmodus. This creature is truly an effective mount. It is a great glider, and it really has done a lot for me in terms of travel. It has the Sanguine Elixir as well, which is an absolute cheat for tames. I started a bit done like that with a click of a button. You'll have no issues whatsoever, or seemingly no issues whatsoever with the taming. You know, you never know what's going to happen. You could just get something like one of those ants just tear your tame to bits and you ruin all of its effectiveness. That's annoying. Has that happened to you before? Comment that down below because I want to know. Again, it's got the same gliding ability as the Griffin and the Snow Owl. It really is just such a nice thing for a flyer to have, and this really does utilize it very effectively. I like how it uses the gliding ability. It feels very smooth, even smoother than the Snow Owl's one, and I do prefer it as a travel mount. They're also only spawn on Fjorda, like I think the Snow Owl, again, it does spawn on Fjorda too, but if you are on that map, I would rather go for this creature than the Snow Owl. It's just more useful in terms of all of its other abilities that for me as a PvE player, and I just prefer its general agility. In at number 3, I've decided to put the RG because this has been here for absolutely ages, and it is a go-to for me. Yes, while maybe not the fastest and most agile mount out there, I have done most of my travelling in Ark with simply this creature and this creature alone. I really do love it. Yes, nostalgia does play into it, but considering it spawns on the island and it is just so effective for metal gathering and more transportation, actually. The Dodic and the Yankees will be doing that, and it can pick those up too. You can also pick up berries, so if ever I was going to a cave, I could just pick up berry of this thing. This is pre-cryopod days, if you are wondering. Now I usually just would cryo up my berry, or soul traps really, because I use that mod instead. Yes, I use mods because I love them. The game is definitely better with them, at least from my perspective. They also can travel very long distances, considering their stamina is great. Their weight is also up to quite a high standard, and I really do like that. And obviously with the weight reduction, it's 50% on things like metal, crystal, and obsidian, which is why they're just such great metal haulers. They also have a portable smithy as a saddle, so you can do anything you do in the smithy in the RG saddle. So if you want to repair your armor after a cave run, let's say, you can, because those pesky autoclers at some point probably are going to get it, and that's something which you really don't want to happen. They also have a nice neat regen buff too, and I think that really does play into the essence of these creatures just being so versatile but also great travel mounts. In number 2, I've got to put the Bloodstalker, because for any underwater travel this is my go-to and I love it to absolute bits. It is actually insane how much I've been using the Bloodstalker as of late, but also just for general travel on the land as well. It is really effective. You're essentially a living Spider-Man. Its damage is also not to be underestimated. Yes, you're not going to be fighting any bosses with this thing, but you still can kill quite a fair few amount of creatures. They can obviously skate along the top of the water, and you can see all of the aggros of the creatures around you. So if a quick escape is needed, you can always go to the top of the water and skate away at lightning speeds, while also being able to see what creatures are actually aggroed onto you. This helps in a very low visibility environment like the ocean biome. I find that just to be really effective, and it just helps me in a way. Yes, I have the awesome Spyglass mod as well, but I don't need to really press anything for this to happen. It's just instant, and I could leave my awesome Spyglass on all the time, but frankly I wouldn't really want to do that. I only use it when I'm taming things. But obviously then when you hop out of the water, you've still got yourself an absolutely insane travel mount, and then you can be that real Spider-Man energy with you just slinging across the whole map. It's an insane creature for all things travel, and that is basically all I use it for, especially underwater travel. It's my all-time favorite underwater mount, and there is really no competition for this for me. That is my opinion. Let's get into number 1 spot, shall we? And at number 1, I've decided to put the Maywing, as I really do love this creature as a travel mount, and it is unbeaten ever since its release. This has been my go-to travel mount for everything apart from underwater travel. Although this is actually still a very decent underwater mount, and it can skate along the top of the water like the Bloodstalker 2. The Bloodstalker simply does a better job in that regard, but if I quickly need to dip in for something, the Maywing will definitely do the job with absolute ease. The saddle is unlocked at level 18, which is insanely early, so you can be getting these things basically as soon as possible. I think they spawn on Fjorda as well, but I usually go to Gen 2 to tame those things because I have the DLC and I just know they're there. Never tame one on Fjorda, but I think I've heard at some point that they have been on the map. I really am extremely unknowledgeable with Fjorda. Actually, I should probably look up all the creatures that are on that map and then converse with you in future top 10 videos. Either way, these things act as a portable feeding trough too, which is just absurd. It's a really nice ability for them to have. The animation is disturbing, but you know, we'll stick with it. And they can gather berries too, but the main reason why they're such good gliders, because you might say, well, they're just the same as the rock drake really, but you can really get a lot more agility out of these things than the rock drake, and you don't need very, you don't need a big difference in terrain elevation to get these things to actually fly far. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. I really hope that you all did enjoy, as I definitely did enjoy making this one. As always, comment down below what is the best Ark travel mount for you, and if you didn't agree with this list, then make sure to put your 10 down below, and I will see you all later.